Hello and welcome back. Here on my channel this month, we are focusing on some of the people and events in Black history that I never really learned about in school. With the extent of learning Black history in every school I went to being condensed to only the month of February, I've had a lot to learn over the years. It also isn't just that events and people are only talked about during 1 month out of the year, but that it's always the same few points or the same few people, and it's never the whole story. So far this month, we've talked about some amazing people and some terrible events. I've listed those videos down below, so feel free to check them out. You'll find one on Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Race Massacre, one on Frederick Jones, one on the Move bombing, one on Maya Angelou, and one on the Tuskegee experiment. Learning about Maya Angelou showed us she was a strong, persistent, and immensely talented woman. Today we talk about yet another strong and persistent woman, Shirley Chisholm. She was the first African American woman in Congress, and not only the first African American to seek a major party presidential nomination, but also the first woman to seek the nomination from the Democratic Party. How I never learned about her in school, I'll never know. So let's go ahead and learn about her today. Shirley Chisholm was born Shirley St. Hill on November 30th, 1924 in Brooklyn, New York. Her father was from British Guyana and her mother was from Barbados. During her youth, she actually spent some time growing up in Barbados with her grandmother. Shirley was always smart and always got great grades. When she arrived back in the U.S., she went to a highly regarded and integrated high school. In 1946, she went on to graduate from Brooklyn College with a BA in sociology. While there, she won prizes for her debating skills, which would prove important later on. Somehow she still found the time to be able to graduate cum laude, despite being a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and a member of the Harriet Tubman Society. Around this time in the late 1940s, she also met Conrad Chisholm, who she would go on to marry in 1949. From 1946 to 1953, she worked as a nursery school teacher. She simultaneously worked on her master's in elementary education from Columbia University, and she earned this in 1952. From 1953 to 1959, she was the director of not one, but two child care centers. One was the Friends Day Nursery in Brooklyn, and the other was Hamilton Madison Child Care Center in Lower Manhattan. From 1959 to 1964, she was an educational consultant to New York City's Bureau of Child Welfare. Shirley Chisholm was no stranger to politics and activism. Not only was her dad a strong supporter of Marcus Garvey, but she herself witnessed her community advocate for its rights when she was living in Barbados. During her time as part of the Harriet Tubman Society in school, she would regularly advocate for people's rights, whether that be by arguing for the integration of the military, advocating for more women in the student government, or for more African American focused history courses. Between her work advocating for different groups within her community locally and at a more wide-scale level, she also spent the beginning of her career teaching and advocating for children and their well-being. Considering her capacity to care deeply about others in the community, it made sense when she became the second African American in the New York State Legislature, despite facing resistance due to her gender. Instead of giving up, she rallied female voters and won the seat by a landslide. She remained a member of the New York State Assembly from 1965 until 1968. During this time, she was successful in securing unemployment benefits for domestic workers. She also sponsored the SEEK program that provided disadvantaged students the chance to enter college. Shirley was on to bigger and better things to make an even more important impact than she already had. When redistricting in her area created a new congressional district in 1968, she ran for the U.S. House of Representatives under the slogan Unbought and Unbossed. In the general election, she ran against James Farmer. He was an established civil rights activist, and the two had very similar positions on housing, employment, education, and the opposition of the Vietnam War. As many things did at the time, the debate became about her gender. Shirley stood her ground despite being called a little school teacher and used that to her advantage by then touting her qualifications. She told the people that there were Negro men in office here before I came in 5 years ago, but they didn't deliver. She was here to deliver. Not only did she win, but she won by 67% of the vote. The expectation for first-year House members at the time was to fly under the radar. But Fighting Shirley was going to do what she promised to the people, and she came out swinging. Throughout her time in the House, she made a lot of noise and she got a lot done. As during her campaign and prior, she fought for the same issues like opposition to the Vietnam War, increasing federal funding for daycare, and a guaranteed minimum annual income for families. She fought for federal assistance for education and was even a primary backer of the National School Lunch Bill. She was never one to just sit idly by. Shirley served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. She also served on the Committee on Education and Labor from 1971 to 1977. She was on the Committee on Organization, Study, and Review. From 1977 to 1981, she was Secretary of the Democratic Caucus. Also in 1977, she became the first Black woman to serve on the powerful House Rules Committee. She also helped found the Congressional Black Caucus in 1971, and then the Congressional Women's Congress in 1977. In 1977, she also married again, this time to Arthur Hardwick Jr. Arthur was not only a veteran and a civil rights activist, but also a prominent local businessman. The two met when they both served on the New York State Legislature years prior. Now to talk about her presidential campaign that took place amidst her time in the House. Shirley announced her presidential bid for the 1972 election on January 25, 1972. With this, she was the first Black primary party candidate to run for president and the first woman to seek the Democratic Party's nomination. She wanted to be a candidate of the people, and that is what she campaigned on. Her campaign was severely underfunded, and she had 3 confirmed threats against her life during this time. She surmised, based on the lack of support from her Black male colleagues, that resistance was more due to her being a woman than because of her race. She was facing the same issues she had during her House run, but this didn't stop her from fighting for the nomination. By the time the Democratic National Convention came around, she would earn 152 votes during the count. This put her in 4th place for the nomination. Considering she had trouble gaining ballot access, that was still 10% of the vote. After all, she had only gotten her name on 12 primary ballots. As I mentioned earlier, she continued and excelled in her work in the House, even after her presidential campaign. By the late 1970s, it was suspected that she began to lose interest in the House, and in 1982, she declined to seek re-election. She ended her time at the House in 1983 at the close of her 7th term. Her husband Arthur died in 1986, which is likely part of why she decided to leave the House. She didn't stop her work with the community after leaving the House, though. She would teach at Mount Holyoke College as well as staying active on the lecture circuit. She co-founded the National Political Congress of Black Women in 1983, and she also campaigned for Jesse Jackson's presidential bids in 1984 and 1988. Although nominated to be U.S. Ambassador to Jamaica by President Bill Clinton, she declined due to poor health and would go on to settle down in Florida. Shirley Chisholm passed on January 1, 2005. She was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama in 2015. She once said, "I want history to remember me not as the first Black woman to have made a bid for the presidency of the United States, but as a Black woman who lived in the 20th century and who dared to be herself. I want to be remembered as a catalyst for change in America." She never backed down in the face of opposition and always fought for herself and for her community. Her story is one I'm glad to now know. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you learned something interesting. I'll catch you next time.